All right, I have a new Substack essay that is part two in my continuing series on the work of Nathaniel Hawthorne, one of my favorite writers of all time. This is him here, a very good portrait here of him at about 37-ish, something like that. And this is at the time when, it's about 1835 when his short stories really took off. He starts writing them about the age of 30, 31, and then in 1830, and then they just take off in 1835. That was the year that he wrote Young Goodman Brown, which is one of his best stories. So this series, I'm not sure how long it's going to go. Probably at least 3, maybe 4 of these. This is part 2, and this one focuses on the law of karmic balancing, because I think that my thesis is that Hawthorne is the reincarnation of his great-great-grandfather John Hathorne, who was one of the magistrates, one of the 2 examiners who presided over the Salem witch trials of 1692. And he got very wealthy off of confiscating the property of anyone who was accused of a witch. Then he would examine them, send them off to jail, and steal all their property. So he got very, very wealthy doing that. And he was the only person involved who showed no remorse and no regret and no conscience whatsoever. So when he died, I think it was 1717, he went over onto the other side, and he was there for a good century before he reincarnated, almost a little over, as Nathaniel Hawthorne in 1804. So he had some learning to do over there, and it's my theory that he had to learn about compassion and empathy over there. So karmic balancing then. So the idea is that if an individual goes too far in one direction in one lifetime, then he or she has to make up for it in the subsequent lifetime by going in the other direction. And so I think it's interesting. This is Nathaniel Hawthorne's chart once again. And this time I want to focus on the fact that his midheaven, which has to do with career, ascendant has to do with the personality, your ego, the descendant with one-on-one relationships with others, the lower heaven with childhood or one's relations with one's parents, and the midheaven, which corresponds to noon, has to do with one's career. I find it interesting. Plus, he has Uranus conjunct midheaven, and Uranus is the planet of rebellion and revolution and breakthrough. He's got it right in the sign of Libra, and Libra are, of course, the scales. So right away here, I find it interesting that he's got some karmic balancing to do. Now, the sign of Libra actually comes to us from the Egyptians. The Egyptian judgment of the dead, when the soul went to the other side, the first thing that it had to undergo was a judgment of the dead. And here we have the scales, which later do eventually evolve into Libra in the Western system. Here we have a heart. This is the heart of the deceased person. This is the deceased anxiously awaiting the judgment, which is being weighed against a feather of the goddess Maat, M-A-A-T, whose name means truth. And if the feather weighs heavier than the heart, then that means this individual has lived a life in servitude to truth and is ushered along into the astral realm. If the heart, on the other hand, is heavier, then that means that this person has lived a life of self-centered egotism and has sinned against Maat. Normally there's a crocodile monster waiting to swallow up the soul. And here we have Tot, the god of writing, in both forms as an ibis and over here as a baboon, presiding over the proceedings. And the goddesses of Isis and Nephthys, who are associated with the dead. And this is the Ba, the individuals, what Jean Gebser calls the soul's death pole, which is always winged and associated with aerial spirits, whereas the soul's life pole is always associated with water. So this is what I believe that the Egyptians intuited somehow, that near-death experiencers, when they die, the first thing, when they come back, they say, yeah, I did my life review. And that's the first thing that you do when you get onto the other side. You look back over your life. Only in this case, or in the case of, let's say, reality, not myth, you yourself are your own judge. Nobody else judges you. You look at your life and you decide where you went wrong and where the balance needs to be adjusted. And I think that John Hathorne realized he had some adjusting to do. One other thing I'll point out, but I don't want to give away the whole essay because I want you to subscribe. It's only $5 a month, $80 a year. Is once again these nodes, as I mentioned last time, the Karmic Nodes. This is the North Node here, which is in Aquarius in the second house. And the South Node, they don't indicate it here, but it's always 180 degrees opposite. And here it's in the 8th house. Now, the South Node has to do with the karma that you bring with you into this world. The North Node has to do with the karma that you're trying to take it to. And even so, note too that by the law of karmic balancing, they're usually opposite. The 8th house in astrology has to do with other people's money. So I find it interesting that when Hawthorne reincarnated, he brings with him this karma of other people's money. And the second house, which corresponds to Taurus, has to do with your own earthly possessions, your possessions, not other people's. And Hawthorne was poor for most of his life, all the way up until he wrote the Scarlet Letter, which was a big bestseller for him. In 1850, he was like 46 years old, but he was pretty poor all the way up to that point. So by the law of karmic balancing, he had to go through a period of being without and just getting by, instead of stealing other people's stuff, ill-gotten gains, when he was his great-great-grandfather. All right, so there's lots and lots more to discuss about this case of Nathaniel Hawthorne's reincarnation. And I also have a theory in this paper, I won't give it away here, about how I think astrology actually does work. And then I do private astrology readings. Hit me up at johndavidebert@gmail.com if you're interested. And I always appreciate Patreon subscribers as well.